With the Sales Readiness Group, and we're so glad that you joined us for today's session on how to deliver sales coaching in a virtual world. As I mentioned, I'm Norman Behar, and I've got with me my colleague Ray Makela, and both of us are really passionate about sales coaching. We're both partners here at Sales Readiness Group. We do a lot of work with our clients around sales coaching, and it's become really, with COVID-19 and most sales teams grounded and working from home, a really difficult environment in which to coach. So Ray, any thoughts before we jump into today's agenda?
Well, I would just say, Norman, what a pleasure it's been connecting with our clients over the last month. And as you mentioned, in very challenging times, but also hearing the lessons, learning from all of them about how they're adjusting, how they're connecting with their sales teams, and what they're doing really to enable them to be successful in this time. So we're going to share some of that, what we picked up, as well as things we're doing internally, and some of the curriculum and lessons learned from our own training programs, and how we relate that in this virtual world today, where we're not able to be out there riding along and visiting in person, but there's still a lot we can do. We hope to share that today.
Right. I guess I should say we just really appreciate everyone's interest in this topic. We had a huge number of registrations, a lot of people attending the session. I think you'll get a lot out of it today. And certainly if there will be an opportunity where we'll send you the presentation slides, and if you have additional questions, can follow up with you. Just one slide on Sales Readiness Group and who we are. We focus on working with clients to improve the productivity of their sales teams, and specifically do a lot of work around sales management. A couple of years ago, Ray and I were two of the co-authors on the High Impact Sales Manager. As Ray mentioned, much of the sales coaching content we're going to review with you today is from our High Impact Sales Manager program. And specifically, we're going to kind of adopt that content based on the work we're doing with clients right now who are coaching, for the most part, grounded sales teams. So let me share our agenda with you real quickly and how we'll spend the next hour or so together.
Yeah, Norman, just as you're doing that, I also wanted to just orient.
Just challenges related to coronavirus, and it poses a lot of challenges personally and professionally. And first of all, as I mentioned, sales teams are working remotely. Their lives have been disrupted. Their personal lives have been disrupted. Many of them have children at home. Work schedules are being adopted. We see it right now with our own team right here at Sales Readiness Group. We're kind of working some flex hours to really adapt to this. And it's also just challenging, particularly for sales teams, because we had a really great economy going into the coronavirus. If we think about Q1 going through January and February, many teams, including our team at SRG, we had a record number of opportunities in the sales pipeline. And now a lot of those opportunities are stalled. I can recall, Ray, just chatting with a client yesterday, and they said, right now we're really on hold till we have a little bit more clarity about when we're going to be returning to work and what the financial outlook looks like. So sales teams in particular have a lot of challenges. We can't just call clients and ask them about sales opportunities. We need to be a little bit more empathetic. We need to have messaging that's relevant. We need to have a much more helpful tone. And because of that, I would say, Ray, that sales coaching is more important than ever. So any thoughts before we kind of jump to the next topic on our agenda?
Well, I mean, I think we all are adapting, and we've talked and kind of joked a little bit about the before Corona world is kind of gone. We're adjusting to this during Corona, and now, frankly, we're trying to figure out, well, what are we going to take forward, and what does this look like as hopefully we start to emerge and maybe connect with our customers again in person, over the next 6 months or so. So I think we're all figuring it out, but I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned through that. And we need to adjust as much as possible. I think one of the reasons this topic resonates with so many people is just because it's so important now to connect with our sales reps, our employees, and our customers, and just check in and see how things are going and have those conversations. And communication has never been more important. And so there are reasons and ways that we can do that. So yeah, I think it really sets it up.
Clients are very, very receptive to those calls, and particularly our existing clients. We're really getting great feedback. People appreciate it. They want to be, to have communication. We're actually finding it easier to reach people in many ways. But again, that dialogue has to change. So Ray, why now? Why sales coaching now? What's the driver there?
Yeah, so as we go through, and you can see how the agenda is kind of going to flesh out, we're going to talk a little bit about the setup and then get into some of the curriculum about how we actually apply that, good coaching versus bad coaching, which a lot of the principles we're going to share, I think are relevant whether we're in a virtual world or not, but it's a great time to maybe sharpen the saw, right, and remind ourselves of some of those good tactics and good skills that we can deploy. So those are some of the things we're going to be covering and hopefully give people some key takeaways today that they can go and leverage with their team, starting from the very practical of even just some technology and virtual tips down to the coaching mindset and some of the practices they can put in place. So yeah, the why now I think is an important subject is, I think we do need to connect and think about our reps, right? They're struggling. I know we're all adjusting, but it's not a real fun time to be calling, especially cold calling, when people in some cases can't even meet with their customers or can't connect and really be there in person. So the reason I think coaching becomes important is for us to be able to understand their unique challenges, their individual and personal challenges, and build that trust. And we talk about trust a lot in our sales coaching program of just being there, just asking questions and listening and really understanding where they're coming from. I think will set us up to be more successful in the future and will help get us through, this challenging time. So we can kind of do that tee up. We can focus on still building skills. I'm a big Stephen Covey fan. I love the idea of, taking time to sharpen the saw. And, now we can do that. We may have a little bit of time to do while people are waiting to go out and visit clients or while things are a little slower. So what can we do to build skills and to really manage the pipeline the best as possible, during this time?
Yeah, and I think on that, those last 2 points, certainly there's an opportunity to build skills and maybe build some different skills that are going to become more important as we emerge from coronavirus. And I also think just in terms of making sure that when we exit from this, and it'll probably be some kind of gradual exit, that we get the best sales pipeline we can and we can start to reactivate those opportunities that did stall. I'll also mention that not every opportunity is stalling. There are many industries and businesses that are doing well. So we shouldn't just generalize and say that everything is stuck. I mean, probably all of us have clients where business is stuck, and we also have some clients where things are proceeding. And we see that, for example, in many of our technology clients. In terms of ways to coach in a virtual world, this is always, something that, I think people struggle with. Ray, can you just kind of share with us some of the tactics that you're seeing that are effective for coaching in a virtual world?
Yeah, I think a lot of times when we think about especially coaching a rep or skills coaching, we're either out there riding along with them, and I think about
Mhm.
pharmaceutical and a lot of our medical device customers where that's the norm, right? Is you're out there riding along maybe a day a week and you're out
Mhm.
visiting and providing feedback. Or in an inside sales world, they're used to listening to calls. They're maybe joining them in the background and coaching them and then having a conversation afterwards. And some of those options aren't available, but there's a lot of the skills that we're going to talk about that can apply. One, we talk about pre-call coaching. So what can you do to be ready in advance for an upcoming presentation or an upcoming sales call? You can still ask those questions. You can work with them to be prepared, understand the objective for the call, what they're trying to accomplish, what the customer's going to do as a result of that call. So there's great things you can do pre-call
Mhm.
coaching. Certainly we can join meetings, virtual or conference calls where we're listening in. Sometimes we're joint selling, but we'd like to think that oftentimes we're just there as a coach and we're behind the scenes supporting, and then we're going to have a good coaching conversation afterwards, and we need to schedule time and make a point of having that time to debrief and work on those skills afterwards. Now there's a lot of great call recording software.
Mhm.
So, using things like Gong or Chorus or other tools, we can now transcribe, we can look at the analytics for those calls, we can use those as great ways of following up. And I call it investigative coaching, but the idea that you may not be there and maybe you can't even listen to a call, but you can still have them replay it. And this is like the investigative journalist saying, well, Norman, take me back to that call. What did you say? What questions did you ask? How did the customer respond? What were you thinking as you were going through this process and what came out of it? And so we can actually peel back the onion a little bit and probably learn a lot and get them to think through those questions themselves. And then the final piece we'll mention is, sales simulations, role plays, practice. There's a lot that we can do in team meetings or one-on-ones to practice good coaching. So, the idea that, well, we can't be out there, so coaching has to be put on hold. I think there's lots of ways that we can apply those skills today.
Ray, I'm just thinking about, the second bullet there, like joining a virtual meeting. It turns out that we have an account review with one of our largest clients this afternoon. So I've talked to the business development executive who oversees that client. They're going to run the call. We have a presentation prepared. It's going to be a coaching call, and then we're going to debrief afterwards. And then in terms of the pre-call coaching, it just, applies that I have a call with a different business development person on our team today. We're preparing for a major presentation on Friday, and we're going to go through, and again, that salesperson is going to lead that call. It's going to be a coaching call. So I can kind of see just kind of real world how we can apply these and how we are applying these. I think there's also some things in terms of just tips that are very helpful, given that we're all adjusting to whether it's a go-to meeting type world or a Zoom world. But just if you would take us through some of the tips. I know you put together this list, and I thought it was really excellent.
Well, yeah, and I think it really speaks to, one, we hope our reps are doing this with our customers in terms of engaging in the virtual world and making that connection. And I think there was no time that's ever more important than to connect on video and really leverage that resource. I think, and we're all probably getting a little more comfortable, even with our families and with the larger population, but just being able to see them when we can't be there in person. And we think about, if we're a manager, treating our reps like our customer, because they're really who we're serving. So treating them like one and thinking about that virtual connection, thinking about the video platform. And we kind of joke, if you're not comfortable on video, then do what you need to become comfortable on video. So, it's a little awkward at first, or maybe people were reluctant, but now I think it is becoming more, people are becoming more proficient. But take the time to practice. We're doing it with our team. I know we have our daily stand-up, and people can test out their video, their lighting, their backgrounds, and make it work. And we should be doing that, with our reps and our customers as well.
Hey, Ray, I'm going to put you on pause for a sec. Do you want to
Yeah.
just go back to that? I mean, we take it for granted we have our daily stand-up. Can you just kind of share with everyone what a daily stand-up is?
Yeah, I mean, we took this from the development world, the idea that it's a quick meeting. The reason it's called a stand-up is literally we don't want people sitting down in chairs. Now, virtually, people are kind of coming from wherever they are, but the idea is it's just a short check-in, a couple minutes each, to say what happened yesterday, what's going on today, what are we working on going into tomorrow, and what's going right. Today we kind of celebrated, okay, what's something that's going right these days. So we want to capture that, and doing it on virtual gives us a chance as a team to connect, and also to kind of kick the day off and get oriented with any priorities for the day. So I think those types of things are becoming more important and really more and more valuable as we're not able to be in the office or see people face to face. So the other things, and these are again just some tips we put together, but if you're using video and you're presenting virtually, having two monitors, I think, is really a requirement. I mean, being able to extend the display, having your working document or a presentation on one place, having the other virtual platform in front of you so you can manage that like we're doing here, and being able to test that beforehand. So does the video work? Is your audio good? Your headset connected? I mean, all of these things affect how we show up to our reps, and really how our reps show up to our customers. And even, a quick hack of, if you go to your Windows Start and just type in webcam, you can always bring up a webcam and test that out before your call. So you don't even need to launch the call, but just to see what your background and your lighting and your hair and your makeup and whatever, what that looks like. But take the time to do that. Think about your camera and your monitor, and I would say find out where that webcam is, and remember that when you're looking at that, you're looking at the person. So if you have 10 people on the screen and you're looking down in the corner, it's going to look like you're distracted and you're looking at something else, or worse yet, you're looking at your other monitor and all they're seeing is the side of your face. So just some tricks and tips. The other thing I like to mention is get your webcam up if you can. So the idea that you'd love it to be at your eye level, so you're looking at that camera. If it's down low, or you're standing up and it's below you, it's looking up underneath you, looking up your chin, up your nose, frankly, maybe not the most flattering look, but we see that a lot, especially on mobile, where people will set their phone down, and it's just kind of distracting. So these are some of the things that you can use. Now there's great virtual backgrounds if your webcam and your processor and platform support that. Or, even like in Microsoft Teams, you can blur the background out, and that's kind of nice if you're using that. And then one that's near and dear to my heart is learning where the mute button is and learning to use that. I mean, we use Zoom on a lot of our calls. If you put somebody on mute, you can just use the space bar like a walkie-talkie. So hit the space bar to talk, and then let it off, and you're back on mute. So if you have a barking dog, if you have kids, everybody has challenges, but some of the things you can do. And the final piece I'll mention is just to kind of limit the distractions. So even though we say 2 monitors, but turn off your pop-ups, your alerts, those dings and chimes. Remember, if you're a manager and this is your time with your individual in a one-on-one or coaching conversation, you really want to give them the attention. And we'll talk a lot about, actively listening and really being engaged with them. This is the time to lean in with them, and they'll remember that and appreciate it.
So Ray, I think these are really good tips. I think we're all getting much more comfortable on the webcam using virtual displays. There's always, some technical glitches. I could even recall with a client this morning, we had a little bit of a technical glitch. But I think
Yep.
one of the other things I would say is if it's a really important meeting, make sure you're there 15 to 30 minutes early and they really test everything in advance, because there can always be some types of technical issues. So Ray, you covered why coaching now, and I just want to kind of back up for a minute and just talk about why coaching generally, because I think that the environment we find ourselves in today is unique. Hopefully it will pass and things will return to at least a more normal setting. But coaching is really a #1 management action. This gets back to some research. I'm going to give the Cliff Notes version here, but we have the full report available. It was a report we did with Selling Power magazine where they surveyed about 400 different organizations. And we looked at 3 groups where low performing were less than 25% of their reps achieved quota. Average performing were pretty generous there. We said anywhere between 25 and 70%, 75%. And then we called the high impact group, those that had more than 75% of their sales reps achieving quota. And what we found is there were 5 things those managers did differently or better than their peers in the low or average performing groups. And there are 5 of them. The one we're talking about today is coaching, but coaching was the most important one. So certainly performance management, hiring the right people, earning their trust and respect, which relates very close to coaching, and investing in coaching training are all important. But the #1 thing they did differently or better was coaching. And just to kind of put that in perspective, they were nearly 3 times more likely to participate in a sales coaching training. So this is kind of an abbreviated training session we're doing now. Usually they're full day or multi-day sessions. And they also just invest more of their time. So they're probably more proficient. And as such, they're spending more time coaching. But, Ray and I've spent a fair amount of time just kind of setting this up. We'd really love to get some of your input. So I want to get to what good coaching and bad coaching looks like. And Ray, this is an exercise we run a lot, and I'd love to turn it over to you just to get some of our participants to engage and share with us their experiences.
Yeah, thanks, Norman. I think if we look at coaching as important these days, maybe more important than ever, but some of the concepts are still foundational that apply. And a lot of what we're going to talk about is how do we apply the idea of a good coaching mindset in today's world. But what we'd like to do is encourage everyone's input here. And so given the environment we're in, we use the question box as a way of getting feedback. So what I'd like you to do on the first point is think of a great coach. So this is going to maybe require you to think all the way back. Maybe that's high school, college, maybe a time that you had a good mentor or coach that really helped you succeed, helped you be successful. What were some of the attributes of that coach? So what did they do extremely well that was memorable? And I think if you're like most of us, we can think back, maybe that's, I hate to say, but 20, 30, 40 years ago, where somebody really made an impression and it stuck with us. And you're like, that person made me better. What was it about that coach? So I'd love to think about that and go ahead and chat it into the question box. And then we'll call some of these out as they're coming in. Norman, I know we've looked at good coaches across a number of different organizations. What were some of the things that have stood out for you?
I think first of all, you have to think a little about it, coaching being a little bit different than managing. So coaching is really about kind of working from the side. If you think about managing, it's a little bit more top down, but coaching is a little bit more from the side. And I think that trust is a major consideration. It came up a little bit in a couple of our prior slides, but building the trust that you're really there to help that person become better at what they're doing. This isn't an opportunity for judging. It's not about performance management. It's really just about helping people develop. And so I think earning the trust through your actions, through your words is really important. So that would be one of the things that comes to mind. Another is
Absolutely.
really someone who takes the time and is really a good listener. I think that too many managers spend way too much time telling. And so to me, another attribute would be someone who really listens and really tries to understand the challenges that I might be having and my perspective. So I'm curious, do we have some thoughts from our participants? I'd love to get some of their input, Ray.
Yeah, as always, we have a great group today and very engaged. So, Heather brings up some points about a good coach invested time with her and
Mhm.
gave real world feedback, sometimes even if you didn't want to hear it. And I think that's really important. We're not defining coaching as just the cheerleader, right? The someone who's always positive and just telling us great things, but they push us to be better.
Mhm.
And sometimes they identify, sometimes it's a little uncomfortable or a little bit painful, but I think a good coach can do that. Jim mentions the good coach let him take risks. So allowing those risks, but making that a learning experience, right? And the age-old example I'd love is, the associate who lost a big deal and went in to tender his resignation and said, I really blew this in front of the client. Do you want me to resign? And the partner at the time looked at him and said, we just invested millions of dollars in your development. Let this be a learning experience. I'm not going to fire you now. But that idea of taking risks and using that as an experience to get better, I think is great. Olivia says a good coach helped her see what was possible, asked first, so I love that, and told me second, reinforce the behaviors he wanted to continue. So what's going well? What do we want to continue? But getting the individual's input, really important. Wilson mentions asking good questions rather than providing answers, as we talk
Mhm.
about not just telling, right? It's easy to say, do it my way. But we're starting to get into, and I actually would love to get a few thoughts on the maybe on the negative side too, but Olivia says a bad coach is do it my way and pointed out
So
all the
they're in
mistakes.
tell
And
mode.
absolutely. I just had a session yesterday we were delivering, and somebody mentioned that as well, that it's easy to nitpick and point out all the things that are going wrong, but it's not very empowering. It's not very positive. And frankly, if you have more than two or three things to work on, you're less likely to accomplish any of them. So Olivia mentions doing that without recognition of what was going well, and they were confused and deflated.
Right. And I think actually pointing out something they're doing well is really important. In other words, the goal is to build confidence. When you think about the best coaches, they're playing to people's strengths. It's not that they're not pointing out developmental needs, but they're really doing it in the context of a trusted environment where you can really see they're being very fair. They're telling you what things are going well. Someone used the word behaviors before. I think really looking
Hmm.
at
Hmm.
behaviors is critical as opposed to just focusing on the results. The results are backwards looking. The behaviors are what's going to drive future results. Any other thoughts on bad coaching? I know we often in our sessions hear some horror stories, but anything else that sticks out there under bad coaching, right?
Yeah, Jim mentions micromanaging. So, I think that's one we see where we feel like we can't do anything, or again, in the session yesterday, they said it felt like it undermined their confidence because they were second guessing, like looking over your
Mhm.
shoulder all the time. Where a coach should be empowering and really providing an opportunity, as you said, to take some of those risks. So yeah, I think we got a good balance here. Rain mentions a good coach was personally investing in the growth, so feeling
Mhm.
like they have their best interests at mind versus a bad coach kind of, hey, do it this way, or maybe undermining their performance.
Right. I'm going to build on that term empowering a little bit later, but I think it's a really powerful word as it relates to coaching. So, just in terms of qualities of effective coaching, Ray?
Yeah, so this, I think we hit on a number of these themes from the responses, but that coaching should be collaborative, right? That we're working with the individual to implement that
Mhm.
plan and improve their skills. We're not dictating, and we need to meet them where they are. So the idea that coaching should be flexible and we need to adapt, and it's one of the things, even though we have a process and some tools, it's up to the manager to apply that and determine the specific needs of that salesperson and kind of meet them where they are to grow them, because we can't provide a one size fits all. It just doesn't work.
No, I think that point of co-create. So we want it to be a collaborative for sure. I think getting the salespeople invested has a lot of benefits associated with that. We'll talk about some of those benefits in a few minutes. The other power of sales coaching is it's really specific to the needs of each salesperson, so that every salesperson on your team has a unique sales coaching plan focused on their developmental areas. So I think the power of coaching is that can be actually adapted, as the slide says here, flexible.
Yep.
So that takes us really to the coaching culture and mindset. So if we think about what makes a great organization, it really is about culture. And so having a coaching culture and a mindset, sounds really good, but doesn't necessarily mean we can create it. So what we want to do is provide you with some techniques for really developing that coaching culture where everybody's getting coaching, people are receptive to it, it's kind of top of mind with everyone. And I want to prompt again by asking a question. If we could just use the question pod, and again, want to thank you again for participating. Just some of your thoughts on this question: difference between managing and coaching, both two very important management actions. They both showed up in the top 5. I think coaching was number 1, and managing performance was number 2. Managing pipeline is also really important. But just some of the distinctions between the role of the manager and the role of the coach. And Ray, while we're waiting, I just any thoughts you want to offer on those?
Yeah, so I'm just typing that in so everybody can kind of have a placeholder here. We'll get their responses, but I think it feels different, and I think we can define some of the attributes or behaviors, as you mentioned, between the two. And it's not to cast a judgment and say, well, managing is bad and coaching is good, or you're always doing one or the other. We need to manage, and certainly there are things within your team and the organization that require good management. But we think about coaching as a little different philosophy, a little different approach, and a different mindset as we're talking about. I don't want to influence the group too much, but we're seeing some responses coming in. Kimberly mentions wanting feedback versus do it my way. So I think that goes back to the kind of good coaching versus bad coaching. So Heather mentions managing. I believe this is managing is kind of what to do versus coaching being let me find my way, or let's develop that together. Olivia with some insights. Coaching is personal development, where managing is performance management for the organization. Managing is the job, so pipeline, forecast, negotiating, budgeting, but coaching is on building skills. And that's certainly the way we think of it. As you need to manage that pipeline, you need to manage your meetings, your reports, kind of the daily operations, but we're thinking about coaching as a way of building the team and building the capabilities.
I really like that. I think that idea of taking, in our book, The High Impact Sales Manager, we actually break it down into 5 areas. So recruiting and hiring is one management action, and depending on the size of the organization, managers may be more or less involved, but typically they're always involved in their hiring process. Managing performance, I mean, that's what the term sales manager means, is to manage performance. Pipeline management, which has elements related to management and coaching, opportunity coaching associated with that. Leading a team and coaching a team. So I think we kind of break it down into 5 areas, and coaching being a very important subset of those areas. Ray, anything else you want to share before we just kind of go to a little bit more of a textbook type of definition?
Yeah, so there was just one other comment. Rain mentioned coaching is about drawing the proper behavior out of the rep, not directing them. And I think that again goes to asking versus telling, and really working with them. And we'll talk about why that's so important next.
Great. So we think about the manager's focus. I think someone mentioned, very task oriented. Setting performance expectations. What is it you actually expect someone in your team to achieve, whether that's the results or the behaviors that drive those results? And in many cases, it may involve telling. Telling's not a great action, but if you have to have someone complete their expense reports or turn in a weekly sales report or update their pipeline in Salesforce, those may be opportunities for telling. And then the coach's focus is much more on developing the team's potential. Again, pretty flexible because you create a coaching plan for each individual. You want to make sure that it's collaborative. We're going to chat a little bit about self-discovery and the importance of self-discovery and getting the reps' input. And we want to ask, we're going to talk about a framework for asking in just a minute. So kind of just get a sense of some of the key distinctions between those areas. And I mentioned empowering before, because I think this is really important, that the reason that sales coaching is so powerful is it creates leverage. If you think about the average sales team, there's probably somewhere between 3 and 10 direct reports. So you get kind of exponential sales results when you can leverage your skills as a manager to really help others on your team to grow. So again, it's about kind of empowering others. And the level of empowerment is, I don't know if we have a show of hands here, but I know that in our discussions, many managers see themselves as kind of the chief problem solver. And sometimes that feels really good because you're busy, you're helping people based on your expertise, but it's not nearly as powerful as the empowerment of helping train your people to solve their own problems without your involvement. Because what allows you to do is to move your focus from being very tactical to being much more strategic. So you're going to have a much more empowered sales team. And obviously, you're going to find yourself spending less time putting out fires and really focusing on those areas that are strategic in terms of what are your longer term goals for your team, what are the new areas that you want to explore, well, who are the new accounts that you guys can go after. So again, if we can train salespeople and coach them to solve their own problems, we start to create that level of empowerment.
Yeah, I think that can be really uncomfortable for frontline managers oftentimes. They grew up as typically as top performing reps. They know the way
Mhm.
that worked for them. It's easy to kind of jump in and ride to the rescue or close that deal or solve the problem. But frankly, it's not scalable. And when we think about what's going to make the biggest difference for us as a sales manager, the biggest return on our time is going to be
Mhm.
growing our team and making them more capable to step out on their own versus jumping in every time where now we're on speed dial and we have to be the chief problem solver, as you said.
Right. So I think that really is a great way to segue into the coaching mindset. So we want to create this coaching mindset, which is really about collaboration and empowerment. And we use a mindset here called the 3 A's. And Ray, do you want to just kind of take us through this? And again, we'll pull in our participants as well to get some of their assistance.
Yeah, and I see some familiar faces on the audience today, which is great. So some of you may have seen this before. I call this our Swiss Army knife of sales coaching because I think it's the one that you can whip out and do just about anything with. But it's the idea that we can always start with asking a question. Tell me how you think that went. What did you like about that? What occurred to you, that you thought would happen or what was different? And so just asking those open questions and getting their response. One thing I've found using that technique is we learn a lot about their thought process and we learn a lot about where they're coming from. Were they even in the same meeting that we were in? Because sometimes what you hear is very different. So we can learn a lot by asking. We're going to talk more about assuming best intentions. So let's remove our judgment, not think that, oh, they're lazy or they're incompetent or they're screwing up, but they're trying to, if we assume that they're trying to do a good job, what's getting in the way of that? Let's build a plan to remove those roadblocks or to help them achieve and perform. So, if we assume the best intentions, it changes the way we're showing up for them. And then ultimately actively listening, which is a skill that needs to be practiced, but, suspending our own response, biting our tongue sometimes, even when we know the answer, or we think we know the answer, but listening in. We're going to get into those in a little bit more detail.
So, this is a key framework associated with coaching. We're going to, again, as Ray mentioned, we're going to explore each of these areas. But the question often comes up, this takes time and you really have to develop that coaching mindset. Wouldn't it just be faster just to tell people what to do? So I'm going to ask that question facetiously, but love to just kind of get some ideas. Why not just tell everyone what to do? Why go through all this work around active listening and asking questions and assuming the best intentions? Why not just simply, you're the boss? Why not just tell them what to do?
Yeah, so I'd love to hear from our audience on that. I just typed that in, but love to hear responses from why don't we just tell them, especially if we know the answer. Um, why don't we just give it to them?
And I think all of us, even though the question is a little bit facetious, I think often we find ourselves in tell mode, particularly when we're busy. Someone interrupts us. They say, "Hey, what should I do next?" As Ray mentioned, we came up from the sales ranks, so we just kind of tell them what to do. And maybe a much better question is, "Hey, I have some thoughts on that, but why don't you tell me what you think we should do first?" So really getting them to try and self-discover. Ray, what kind of thoughts are we seeing?
Yeah, well, this one really resonates with me. So Olivia mentions telling creates a groundhog day. So we just keep
Mhm.
telling and they don't own it and they don't do they don't make changes or they don't do less. So I think we see that a lot in those conversations where we come out and we say, okay, do it this way. And they're like, wait a minute, didn't we have that conversation last time? And so they haven't gone through that thought process. And so, a lot of other great responses. Kimberly mentions asking helps them think for themselves. And
Hmm.
Wilson mentioned asking builds trust. So I think if we do that, we get past the, hey, just do it my way, and then they're resistant or they're defensive, or maybe they forget, right, to do that, as opposed to owning it. Heather mentions getting buy-in. If you build it together and you're gaining their
Hmm.
perspective and their ideas, and Rain mentions actual retention of what they are trying to learn decreases over time because of their recall versus discovering. So the idea, if they help discover and build it, they're going to have that stake in the ground. They're going to buy into it versus you just tell them, they're going to forget. They're going to go back to their own ways. So really good input from the group today.
So in terms of asking first, I guess, some of the thoughts about that, I think this idea of self-discovery, if you just tell them, you actually get resistance. People generally don't like to be told what to do. And you really want to kind of get their perspective first. So these are some of the key areas associated with actively listening, with asking first. And Ray, I know we have a questioning model that we use that really promotes kind of very thought-provoking questions. And I wonder if you could take us through that model.
Yeah, and I think this is one that especially now we can think about. We can use this before a call. We can use this,
Hmm.
as we're riding along, or if we're talking to them, quick debrief, or afterwards, even if we weren't on the call. And the idea that, hey, tell me what you observe, or if it's beforehand, what do you think you'll observe, right? What do you plan that's going to happen? What does that mean? So we're reflecting on that. And then afterwards, hey, how are we going to apply that, or what are we going to do differently? So we think of it as the what, what's going on there. So what does that mean to you? And now what are you going to do? How are you going to apply it
Hmm.
coming forward? So just falling back to those questions, if nothing else, gives us, and we may not know and probably don't know the answers, but asking them, getting them to think through, and that you've made progress when they start asking these questions of themselves, like, oh, I know he's probably going to ask me that. So what did I think would happen? What did I think about it, based on the reaction? And then ultimately, so what, right? Who cares? What am I going to do now based on what I've learned from that? And we can apply this in a number of different settings, but it gives us a little framework for asking those great questions.
Right, as you mentioned, we could do this before we go on a call. So what are the call objectives? So what do we, how do we think the customer is going to respond to that? Now what we do, what should we do differently? And for sure, we can use it after a call. Again, pulling in just our own participants, and I have some thoughts on this next question, but I'd love to hear, from our participants, just, what are some of the questions you like to ask about self-discovery? And so if
Yeah,
we
so
could use
let's,
our question
yep.
pod again to kind of get some participation. We really appreciate the participation. Ray, any favorite questions you like to ask?
Well, again, I think it'll be just chatted that into the question box, but I think most people have a few questions in their background, right?
Hmm.
To get that input, to get some feedback. I like to start with the positive. So I think asking a question around what went right, what did you like
Hmm.
about that call, or what was in line with what you expected, gives them a great application and a great thought process. So I think that's a good starting point. We'll see what others think, but I'll be curious to see what the audience thinks of questions they ask to promote that self-discovery, say after a call that you've observed with them. So just while we're waiting for other responses, Wirata asked a question. How does this work or apply to smaller organizations or companies or startups with a small team and a small sales force? And I guess I would say I don't think the principles are any different of us having a cadence and setting time aside if we're out there, and maybe it's just we only have a few reps starting up, but that we're taking time to say, we're going to work on your development. We're going to ask these questions, and we're going to develop, a plan to improve your skills, which we'll touch on a little bit briefly. But I do think it applies, small or large, and even in a one-on-one setting. Rain brings up a question related to the self-discovery. So what did you notice when you first walked in? So getting them to kind of, again, that's the observation question. What was going on there? What did you notice about that? What struck you that way? Jim said, what one thing would have made this a better call, right? So
Great
getting them
question.
to reflect on, yeah, absolutely. What happened and what could have made this even better. And sometimes we find reps are harder on themselves, so they only want to talk about the negative, and we need to step back and say, well, what went right? Or they have the happy ears on and they're like, oh, the client loves us, it was really good. Great. What would have made that, if you're saying this is an 8, what would have made it a 10? What can you do to bring that up to the next level? Heather has a great input here. Take the rep back to the call objective, which sometimes that's sobering to say, what did we accomplish and what did we expect to accomplish? And sometimes, the call goes a different direction. It felt good. The client likes us. We're like, but we set out this objective for the call. Did we accomplish it, or where did we go? And linking them back to that, I think, is a great self-discovery question.
Yeah, I want to build on that for a minute. I'm going to go back one slide. If we think about the what questions, when we think about it from a pre-call planning standpoint, the what are the call objectives is a really a great question to ask, because it allows us to kind of anchor around the call objectives. And I think one of the things we've discovered is that in many cases, particularly with existing customers, sales professionals don't always have a clear call goal. And so they end up in, I think one of our clients, in a large industrial client, called them social visits. They had really good relationships and they would go out and visit and build rapport, which is very important. That's something you want to have with your clients. You want to have great rapport, but there wasn't a clear call objective. So I think this idea of, what is the call objective, or what are the call objectives, and then being able to tie back to that, saying, well, how do you think we did, relative to our call objectives, gives that call a sense of purpose. So I love that question a lot. And I think it is just kind of generally an area for improvement, that there are call objectives. Doesn't mean we're always going to achieve them with our clients, but at least we're walking in with a game plan. And then, like any great game plan, we're really going to need to adjust based on kind of the reaction we're getting from the customer, making sure we're asking a lot of questions. Again, Ray, without, spending more time on this piece, I want to get to the other areas, which are around assuming the best intentions and also the active listening. So I'll turn it back to you on those.
Sure. Yeah. And I think, the assuming best intentions, as we mentioned, is really about avoiding judgments, right? So if we can stay neutral, if we can try to understand their point of view and not taint it by our own preconceived notion. And sometimes that's really challenging because we are tainted, or we think based on the background. So I think trying to suspend that, and sometimes it really is just okay, I'm going to go in there neutral. Let's ask questions and listen, and then see where we end up, versus going in. Oftentimes we think we already know the answer, or maybe we've already made an impression about that individual. So I think that's great. I just wanted to point out, and Olivia had a great point about that, of I think related to assuming best intentions, which is, make it a chat. So she says a cozy coffee chat instead of a big commercial kind of formal conversation. So stepping back a little bit, and especially now connecting with them one-on-one. And then she had some other great feedback about kind of pre-call coaching questions about what did you hope to achieve, and what would that sound like? What would get in your way? So what obstacles might be there? How can you plan to be ready for that? What are we forgetting to consider? Great open-ended question. And how confident are you that you might achieve your objective? So I think using those questions and assuming the best intentions is a great way of having a conversation, versus saying, oh yeah, I don't like this, or I'm not pleased, or that didn't go very well afterwards. But taking that positive and neutral
It's a really
stance.
good macro point as well. So we have some of the specific questions, which are excellent, but also the macro point is that we want to do this in an intentional, but also in a very, casual environment. Again, coaching is about building trust. And so this really is, when we think about collaboration, I think you said it was Olivia that, used the term making it a conversation. I think the conversation lends itself to collaboration. And in a conversation, one of the most important skills when you think about who people enjoy speaking with is people who are really good at active listening.
Yeah, and we teach this in our selling skills class as well, because even though I think people would say, oh yeah, I'm a good listener, what are they doing? Oftentimes they're listening only long enough to respond, or they're not really listening because they're thinking 2 steps ahead about what they're going to say. But really actively listening helps the person really feel appreciated, and it helps our understanding. There's a lot of social science behind this that say, hey, just acknowledging the person and acknowledging their perspective builds that trust and helps them be respected. So I think it goes a long way, especially in these types of conversations, to really lean in, and we will learn a lot about what's important to that individual, and we can practice those skills, which is really paying attention to the person, suspending our own judgment, biting our tongue sometimes, even though we want to jump in, but letting them finish, and practicing that, paraphrasing back even to say, well, what I heard, let me make sure I've got this right. So you're really respecting their perspective and their impression.
Ironically, this is a skill that we train not only for sales coaching, but also just for great selling skills. The best sales professionals are great listeners. And the ironic part is that sometimes our veteran salespeople actually have the biggest challenges actively listening because they feel like they've heard it so many times, they kind of jump to conclusions. And even if they're right, they need to slow it down. And as a coach, we need to slow it down, because even if we're right, we do want to make sure that we're actually taking the time to listen. Perhaps something will come up that we didn't really appreciate. More importantly, I think it just makes a person feel that they're being appreciated and respected. So even when we know the answer, just taking the time to actively listen, perhaps our perspective wasn't right. And even if our perspective was right from the outset, we're providing a professional courtesy and building trust through listening. So I want to go to a key aspect of the coaching, which is developing your team, and really talk about two types of coaching. And just, we won't go into depth in these, but we do want to at least provide some context and a framework. So Ray, can you just kind of take us through the distinction between the opportunity coaching and the skills coaching?
Yeah, I mean, we make this distinction because I think there are different approaches to these two. There's a different cadence, as we'll talk about. But when we think about opportunity coaching, that's really deal coaching or account coaching. So there's a challenge, maybe there's a deal we're trying to get across the finish line, or maybe a competitor has gotten into our account and we're trying to help with that. Our experiences, sales managers are actually pretty good at that. They've seen a lot of deals, they've grown up in that world, and they're happy to jump in and kind of provide that input. And we'll talk about some great questions to do that. Skills coaching, though, is a little bit more strategic, which is thinking about those 2 or 3 things that will really grow that individual and improve their performance. And I always like to think about the star athletes. If you ask them, hey, what 1 or 2 things are you working on to improve your game? They'll know exactly what they're trying to do at that point to improve their swing, or go to the batting cage or go to the driving range or whatever that is that they need to do that's going to help them get better. So skills coaching is about identifying those key skills, whether it's better call planning, better questioning, better presenting of the value proposition. What are those things that are going to take them over the finish line, and how do we build a plan to help them get better quarter over quarter? So we like to break that down and think about, opportunity coaching is kind of more ad hoc when there's a challenge or a deal. We might do that in a pipeline review or a sales meeting, or maybe a pursuit meeting like we do. Say, hey, this is big enough. Let's have an actual coaching and pursuit meeting to break all of this down and think about that deal and how we get it through. Versus skills coaching, we have a great skills assessment that helps to identify those areas. Let's co-develop, let's go through that with the individual, develop a couple of key priorities, and then have our coaching visits keep referring back to, we said that these were the most important, so what are we doing to help continue to improve those skills, week over week, month over month?
Great. So let me just get a little bit more granular on each of these, just some things you can kind of take away on opportunity coaching. So as Ray mentioned, this is, you're on the phone, you're talking about a specific opportunity. Maybe you're doing a pipeline review. So you can think about, well, what's the business need? Is there really, another coming with COVID-19, is there still a compelling business need? Is the budget still in place? Do we know what it is? What's the decision-making process? Has that changed at all? Is our solution still a great fit? What's the timing? What's the revenue potential? What are the relationships? And that doesn't necessarily mean in this current environment that we're going to necessarily be able to advance a stuck opportunity, but at least we're going to know the answers to these questions. So again, we're going to make the slides available. There's a lot, a lot of great questions here. I'm sure there's a lot of other questions we should ask, but at least confirming what's the business need, what's the decision-making process, how well does our solution fit, what's the timing? So we're now hearing a lot of deals that were kind of late Q1, early Q2, sliding to the end of this quarter or maybe even to later this year, Q3. What's the revenue potential? Is it still the same? We had a client I was on with yesterday. They want to start with one sales team as opposed to two sales teams. Well, probably a little bit, more than half the revenue potential. What's the relationship with the buyer? Do we still have the right, alignment? So questions we should ask so that when we, I think to a point Ray made earlier, when we emerge from the current environment, we emerge with the best pipeline possible. And on the skills side, as Ray mentioned, we have an excellent assessment, but it doesn't have to be a formal assessment. We do have a formal assessment. It's collaborative in nature. The salesperson fills it out, the manager fills it out, and then they can compare, what they think are the most important areas for skills development. But generally, it comes down to these 8 skills. And as Ray mentioned, it could just be 2 or 3 of these for every single salesperson. So for a relatively new person that's just building their book, it might be, a little bit more front-ended around prospecting, building relationships, call planning. For others, it might be about asking better questions, taking the time to listen around developing needs. For some others, managing feedback, specifically how to manage objections. So the idea is to create a collaborative plan around 2 or 3 skills. And that's why sales coaching should be different for each individual on your team. And really getting their buy-in and their active involvement. These are areas I want to get better as a sales professional, and you're supporting that development as their manager. So again, a lot more to cover in these areas, but just looking at some things we can do to, as Ray mentioned, on deal coaching or opportunity coaching, and on skills coaching, and really focusing on specific takeaways. And Ray, I know you said we're going to have some takeaways, and we're kind of running up a little bit against the hour. We got a little bit of time, but if you could take us through the takeaways and maybe some of the next steps, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, what we wanted to do is a little different than a typical webinar that we provide, but provide a little bit more detail of some of the curriculum that we teach in our coaching, as well as how to apply it today. What's different and what's the same, frankly, and how we can actually put that into place. So I do think we have some key takeaways here. Yeah, on the next slide. There are challenges, and there was a question early on that said, well, what are some of the key messages, or how would we communicate that? And I think one of the messages, frankly, is we don't have all the answers. And I think with as a manager to rep relationship, even acknowledging that these are unprecedented times, they're uncomfortable, we're all struggling in different ways, but just doing that check-in and saying, well, how's it going? And back to the positive, well, what's going right? What did you accomplish, or what can we celebrate? And I know we're doing this with our clients just to check back in and say, well, how are things being affected these days? Is there something we can do to help, whether it's, business related or not? But I think building those relationships are going to pay off in the future, and both building them with our reps and building them with our customers. So I think we can use the virtual meetings. I think we can leverage video now more than ever, and then applying some of those core concepts like the 3 A's and asking those great questions and connecting with our team can really make a difference. And then ultimately, even on the deal coaching, we can't afford to lose or forget about anything that's in the pipeline right now. So let's make sure we're coaching and helping our reps take advantage of those opportunities that are there to get them through, I think, regardless of the industry, regardless of where you are. So applying those selling skills and helping to coach them along can help build their confidence and really work with them. So, the final piece here, and we didn't really talk about your own cadence, and this is going to depend on your situation, but what we would suggest is at least set aside time to check in, whether that's as a team meeting and hopefully as a one-on-one, that you have some time to do that, and you can have them collect maybe over the course of the week or 2 weeks, they collect some of those issues that they want to talk to you about, and you also connect some things that you want to coach them on, but you're doing that during your one-on-ones. And then after big deal pursuits, you're saying, let's use this as a coaching conversation. Let's block out 15 minutes and say, what went right? What might you do differently? What are we going to take away and do going forward? Boy, that can really help to build. And as we said, let's use this as an opportunity to get better while we wait for things to kind of come back up to speed.
Yeah, and Ray, I want to just expand on that last point because it's a question that comes up often is, what's that really mean, schedule dedicated coaching time? I talk with my salespeople all the time. So we really want to kind of distinguish between the dedicated coaching time and kind of just the normal course of discussion that goes on during the course of the week. So you may be connecting with people on your sales team about different opportunities, different policies, different aspects of running the business, even, multiple times per day. The idea of the scheduled dedicated coaching time is having a much more deliberate um, conversation, and these times making sure we're taking the time to check in how they're doing personally, what's going right, what are some of the challenges they're posing, and then focusing a little bit on the opportunities as well as the skills. And my recommendation would be having kind of a half-hour dedicated, ideally weekly, with each member of your team in this virtual world where we're not connecting in person and there may be less sales calls taking place. Just that kind of personal connection really kind of glues the team and solidifies your team together. So just a thought on that. And Ray, I know we had a couple of other quick areas we wanted to cover related to sales coaching.
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to provide again some of the training content, hopefully some key concepts you could go and maybe apply today. But we also did want to make people aware that we are offering this program on demand. So a series of micro learning videos with assignments and a workbook. And actually, we're going to offer a special to kick off a cohort starting in May. So you'll see the code here. This will be included in the follow-up that our marketing director Alonzo sends out. But if people want to sign up either individually or a team, they can do that. So $50 off the $5.95. Basically watch the videos, and then we either Norman or myself will be doing a weekly office hour, kind of an ask the expert opportunity to ask about your coaching challenges, maybe collaborate on some of the challenges you're running into, and also the use of the tools. So over the course of the month, we'll go through that entire program. So we're going to have this available through May 1st. We're going to kick off the first cohort session office hour on May 8th, and then we'll continue the following for 4 weeks following that. So I think it is a nice opportunity if you have managers who are interested or you'd like to go through the program, or for some of the clients we have, if you have individuals that haven't been through in the past, they can drop into this public session and take advantage of that content. So that's really what's coming. Norman, as you mentioned, we will provide a follow-up with a copy of the slides and the contact information on the next page, and look forward to touching bases. And if there's anything we can do to help, please let us know.
Great. So as Ray mentioned, we would love to see you if you want to sign up for the on-demand. We're going to support that with weekly cohorts, either myself or Ray, kind of an added bonus during this time where people have a little bit of extra time. So we'd love to see you take advantage of that if you're interested, or others that might be. Again, we'll follow up on that. If you have any groups, little larger groups, we'd love to talk to you about private sessions for those groups. And most importantly, if you have a chance, subscribe to our blog. We're putting out a lot of complimentary content right now. If you want to get in touch with us, please contact us, and we will follow up with email and the slide presentation. So thank you all very much for participating today. I know we've really enjoyed the conversation. Ray, any parting thoughts before I close out the meeting room?
Well, and I think it's actually a really good point to end on, because all of this was about kind of coaching in the virtual world. But the question about, are there different skill sets needed in the virtual than in person? And hopefully we've set the foundation that I think a lot of the good fundamental coaching skills do apply, whether you're virtual or in person. I think getting comfortable with the technology, the video, the interactions, and really asking questions and learning how to show up and collaborate and listen in a virtual environment is really what's most important. Love to hear from others, offline if you have other suggestions, but that's what I would add to that.
Great. Thank you all very much, and have a great rest of your week. Thank you for joining us today.
Great. Thanks, everyone.